His daughter pointed to a barefoot girl lying on cardboard and whispered, "Daddy, let's take her home." What he did next shocked everyone. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the pavement as Marcus Blake walked briskly down the sidewalk, holding his daughter Lily's small hand in his. His tailored navy suit didn't match the simplicity of the small town streets, but he didn't care. His mind was already running through his to-do list, another meeting rescheduled, emails waiting for replies, a board decision hanging in the air. But all of it faded when he looked down at Lily, skipping beside him in her white dress with her brown hair bouncing in two tight braids. She had just finished her second week at her new school, and all she wanted to talk about was the butterfly they found in the playground and how her teacher read a book about kindness. Marcus nodded along, distracted, but smiled every time she laughed. They turned a corner onto a quieter street when Lily suddenly stopped. Marcus followed her gaze to the edge of an alley where, beneath a flickering street lamp, sat a small figure on a piece of cardboard. She was maybe 5 years old, her blonde hair tangled and her yellow dress smeared with dirt. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees, and her bare feet were tucked underneath her. She looked up as they passed, eyes wide and blue, filled with something between exhaustion and fear. Then, in a quiet voice that made Marcus stop mid-step, she said, "I'm hungry and want to sleep, sir." He turned instinctively, unsure whether he'd imagined it. The girl hadn't moved. She didn't beg or cry. She just looked at him as though stating a fact. Marcus's stomach tightened. He had donated to shelters, funded programs for children, and written checks larger than most people earned in a year. But he had never stood face to face with a child like this, alone, vulnerable, and cold. Lily tugged on his hand. "Daddy," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "That girl is sleeping there, let's take her." Marcus blinked. "Sweetheart, we can't just," but he stopped. Because he looked down and saw Lily's eyes filled with concern and confusion, her brow furrowed like she couldn't understand why someone like that girl would be left to sleep on the street. And in that moment, Marcus realized he didn't have a good answer. He crouched beside the girl, his voice low and careful. "What's your name?" She hesitated before whispering, "Sophie." Her lips were cracked, and her fingers were red from the cold. Marcus reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small protein bar from Lily's school bag. She took it slowly, watching him the whole time, and then devoured it in seconds. Marcus stood up and took out his phone. He called his assistant, told them to cancel the evening meetings. He called his driver and gave an address. Then he looked at Lily, who was still watching Sophie with quiet determination, and said, "We're going to take her somewhere warm for now, all right?" Lily nodded as if it had been her plan all along. As the car pulled up, Marcus gently lifted Sophie into his arms. She didn't protest, but her small body flinched at his touch. She was light, too light. He wrapped her in his overcoat and held her close as they got into the back seat. Lily scooted next to them and took Sophie's hand without hesitation. During the ride, Sophie leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder and slowly closed her eyes. Lily whispered stories to her, soft and soothing. Marcus stared out the window, heart heavy, mind racing. Something had shifted. It was the first time in a long while he felt something more powerful than control or success. It was the first time he felt pulled by a responsibility not born out of obligation, but out of love. By the time they reached his house, Sophie was asleep. Lily helped carry her blanket inside, and for the first time, Marcus Blake didn't feel like a man with too much to lose. He felt like a father who might just have something real to fight for. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see Sophie's face, the way she clutched her knees, the quiet desperation in her voice, the way she flinched when he first touched her. He sat in the leather armchair across from the guest bedroom door, one ear tuned to the silence, half expecting her to wake up crying or to try to run away. But she didn't. She had fallen asleep in the car and stayed asleep after he carried her inside, after he changed her into one of Lily's extra nightgowns, and even after Lily tucked a stuffed bear under her arm and whispered, "You're safe now." Marcus stayed close, too restless to leave her alone. The weight of the day pressed on him like a quiet storm. He had done something impulsive, something uncharacteristic, but for once it didn't feel like a mistake. By morning, Sophie was awake but quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, legs dangling above the floor, staring at the wall like she was still waiting for someone to yell or send her away. Marcus knelt beside her and offered breakfast, pancakes, berries, a warm glass of milk, but she just looked at the plate with suspicion, as if unsure it was truly meant for her. Lily sat beside her, already halfway through her own plate, and began talking about school and her favorite movie. She slid her fork towards Sophie and said, "Try the strawberries. Daddy puts honey on them. It's the best." Slowly, hesitantly, Sophie picked one up and tasted it. A few seconds passed, then she reached for another. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't want to overwhelm her. But inside, something softened. It was the smallest of victories, and he would take it. After breakfast, Marcus called his lawyer, his assistant, and then Child Protective Services. He explained what had happened, gave them Sophie's name, and was met with skepticism, concern, and endless paperwork. They couldn't find her in any missing persons databases. There was no record of her in the local foster system. No hospital visits, no school enrollment. It was as if she had never existed in any system. That terrified Marcus more than anything. Someone had let this little girl vanish into the background of society, and no one had even noticed. Social services said they would send someone to evaluate her and the home. Marcus agreed, but made it clear Sophie wasn't going back on the street. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. That afternoon, a social worker named Teresa arrived. She was warm but firm, mid-40s with tired eyes and a notepad she seemed reluctant to stop writing in. She asked 100 questions, examined every room, and spoke with Sophie alone while Marcus and Lily waited in the living room. When she finally returned, her expression was unreadable. "She's scared," Teresa said. "But she trusts your daughter." "That's rare." Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. "And you," she added, "you clearly care. But this isn't a simple situation, Mr. Blake. If you want to keep her here even temporarily, we'll need a full background check, home study, psychological evaluations, and a temporary guardianship petition." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Do it. I'll sign anything. Just don't take her away." Teresa looked at him for a long moment, then scribbled something down and stood. "We'll be in touch soon. For now, she stays." The moment the door closed behind her, Lily ran over and hugged Marcus tightly. "You did good, Daddy," she said. Marcus hugged her back and realized his hands were trembling. He hadn't felt this unsure of anything in years, and yet never more certain of what he needed to do. That evening, Marcus took both girls to the garden behind the house. The late sun cast golden shadows over the trees, and Lily began picking flowers, weaving them into a messy crown she placed on Sophie's head. Sophie didn't smile, but she didn't pull away either. She stood still, holding Lily's hand, and for the first time all day, she looked up at Marcus and held his gaze for more than a second. As the sky turned pink and the wind picked up, Marcus sat on the porch, watching them dance through the grass. The quiet girl with the bruised past, the fearless daughter with the open heart, they moved together like they had always been sisters. And for the first time since he brought Sophie home, Marcus let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, this broken thing they were building together could become something whole. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more legal hurdles, more uncertainty. But tonight, there was peace. Sophie had eaten, slept in a bed, played without fear. And Lily had taught her that not all strangers walk away. Some stay. Some become family. 3 days passed in a delicate rhythm, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if the new bond being formed would hold. Sophie had begun to respond more, short nods, quiet yes and no's, and once, a small laugh when Lily slipped on a pillow during a game of pretend. Marcus watched this all unfold with a mix of wonder and deep worry. While Lily continued to be the joyful glue holding them all together, Marcus spent his mornings on phone calls with lawyers and afternoons signing forms, scanning documents, arranging psychological evaluations, and coordinating with social workers. Every call made the situation feel more real, more permanent, and yet the fear of one government decision reversing everything hovered over him like a storm cloud. He spent his evenings trying to learn more about Sophie. He gently asked questions, always giving her space to stay silent. He never pushed. One night, as he tucked her into bed, she whispered that her mother had left her outside a grocery store and never came back. She didn't cry when she said it, and that somehow made it worse. Her voice was so calm, as though she had repeated this to herself so many times that the pain had been packed away neatly, like an old toy no one played with anymore. Marcus didn't ask for more. He simply knelt beside her bed and said, "You're safe now. No one is going to leave you here." And for the first time, Sophie reached out and took his hand before falling asleep. The next day brought news from Teresa, the social worker. Sophie had officially been declared without parental guardianship. No relatives had come forward. Marcus was cleared for temporary custody, pending further review. It was a victory, but one that felt more like a responsibility than a celebration. He spent hours going through safety inspections, childproofing the house, and arranging therapy sessions with someone who specialized in trauma. At the same time, he tried to balance normalcy. He took both girls to a local bookstore, where Sophie clung to his leg at first, overwhelmed by the shelves and the unfamiliar faces. But Lily, ever the guide, grabbed her hand and led her to a corner filled with plush beanbags and picture books. Sophie picked one with a bright yellow sun on the cover and didn't let go of it for the rest of the day. At home, Marcus started cooking more. He wanted the house to smell like childhood, like pancakes in the morning and spaghetti in the evening. He learned that Sophie liked her food cut into small pieces and hated when things were too hot. She never asked for seconds, but always finished what she was given. Lily, on the other hand, loved to talk with her mouth full and insisted on helping set the table, dragging a stool across the kitchen with the determination of a girl on a mission. Watching them sit side by side at dinner, talking about nothing and everything, Marcus realized how quickly love can grow when it's nurtured, how it doesn't always need years, it only needs truth, safety, and patience. One night, he found Sophie in the hallway, standing outside his bedroom. Her eyes were wide, and she clutched a stuffed bear Lily had given her. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped her up gently and carried her to the living room, where he lit the fireplace and wrapped her in a blanket. She didn't speak much, but she leaned against him and slowly fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling. He didn't move for over an hour, not wanting to break the fragile trust settling between them like warm dust. The next morning, Sophie drew a picture of 3 people standing under a tree, 2 girls holding hands and a tall figure beside them. When Lily asked who it was, Sophie said quietly, "That's us and Daddy." Marcus overheard her from the kitchen and stopped mid-step. He stood still, his chest tightening, and for the first time in years, tears welled in his eyes. It wasn't just a word. It was a declaration. A choice. And it meant more than any contract or court ruling ever could. There were still mountains ahead. Legal hurdles, emotional wounds, the long process of healing. But for now, in that house filled with light and gentle routines, Marcus Blake wasn't just a millionaire or a CEO or a man who had once believed he didn't need anyone. He was something entirely different. He was someone's dad. And that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday when the therapist first came to the house. Her name was Dr. Reynolds, a calm woman with kind eyes, a quiet voice, and the patience of someone who had seen many broken things slowly mend over time. Marcus had scheduled the session after speaking with the psychologist recommended by the social worker, and though he had been reassured it would be gentle, he still watched anxiously as Dr. Reynolds sat cross-legged on the living room rug, waiting for Sophie to come down the stairs. Lily had gone to her friend's house for the afternoon, giving them space. Sophie appeared quietly, barefoot and hesitant, clinging to the stuffed bear Marcus had given her just days earlier. She didn't speak, but she walked toward the woman and sat a few feet away, legs tucked beneath her like she was prepared to run if needed. Dr. Reynolds didn't ask questions at first. She simply opened a small box of crayons and began drawing slow circles on a piece of paper. Sophie watched. After a while, she reached out and picked a blue crayon. She didn't look up, didn't speak, but began coloring alongside the therapist. The silence stretched, and Marcus felt like the entire house was holding its breath. Then Dr. Reynolds spoke, soft and warm. She asked about dreams, not scary ones, just the kind that came when your eyes were closed and your heart was quiet. Sophie didn't answer, but she kept coloring. After 20 minutes, she drew a small girl holding a balloon and passed the picture to Dr. Reynolds. It was a beginning. That night, Marcus sat at the edge of Sophie's bed after tucking her in. She hadn't said much after the session, but she looked less tense. She clutched the bear to her chest and whispered, "Is she coming back?" Marcus said yes. "Okay," she replied. Then, unexpectedly, she added, "She didn't make me talk." That was nice. Marcus smiled gently. "You don't have to talk until you want to. We'll wait." She nodded and pulled the blanket over her shoulders, her eyes already drifting shut. The next few days unfolded slowly, each one marked by tiny milestones. Sophie began humming to herself during playtime. She let Marcus brush her hair without pulling away. She started asking small things, "Can I have more juice?" or "Will you sit with me?" And each question felt like a bridge being built between her and the world around her. She still had moments of panic, especially if she was startled or if someone raised their voice on the television. Once, when Marcus accidentally dropped a glass in the kitchen, she froze completely, eyes wide, body stiff. He rushed to her and knelt down, hands open, repeating, "You're safe, it was just an accident." Slowly, she began breathing again. He didn't try to hug her, didn't overwhelm her. He just stayed there, close, until her shoulders relaxed. Lily remained a quiet miracle in all of this. She treated Sophie like a sister, never forcing her to play, never making her explain. She would simply say things like, "We're painting today. Want to help?" or "I'm going to the garden. You can come if you want." Sometimes Sophie followed her, sometimes she didn't. But there was no pressure, just presence. One afternoon, the two girls built a fort in the living room out of pillows and blankets. Marcus brought them snacks and peeked in to see Sophie laughing for the first time, a real, unguarded laugh. It came out like music, and Marcus felt it in his chest like a song he hadn't heard in years. That night, after the girls were asleep, Dr. Reynolds called Marcus to check in. She told him that Sophie's responses were promising. "She doesn't trust easily," she said, "but she's starting to trust you. That's more than most kids her age would do so quickly, especially after what she's been through." Marcus didn't ask what that meant exactly. He didn't want the details yet. He wasn't sure he was ready to hear them. But he promised he'd keep listening, keep showing up, keep doing the quiet work of healing, no matter how long it took. Later, as he stood at the doorway of the girls' shared room, watching them sleep, he thought about how quickly life had changed. A week ago, he was a single father to one bright little girl. Now, he was a father to two. One biological, one chosen. But both of them, in very different ways, had become the reason he woke up every morning with purpose. And as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Marcus whispered into the dark, "You're safe, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere." The following week marked a shift in the atmosphere of the Blake household, not with dramatic events, but with a kind of quiet evolution that felt more profound than any declaration. It started with Sophie waking up earlier and waiting silently in the kitchen while Marcus made breakfast, watching his every movement like she was learning the rituals of normalcy. She no longer needed to be coaxed out of bed or reminded to eat. She still didn't talk much, but her eyes followed Lily with curiosity and trust, and when Lily laughed, Sophie sometimes smiled, as if the sound itself was something she was beginning to recognize as safety. Marcus noticed the way Sophie held her fork differently now, less like a tool for survival and more like something used with comfort. She began choosing her own clothes with Lily's help, carefully picking between patterns and soft sweaters, and one morning, when Marcus asked her if she wanted pancakes or oatmeal, she quietly said, "Oatmeal, please." It was the first full sentence she had spoken to him voluntarily. He didn't react in a way that would make her feel exposed or pressured, but when she wasn't looking, he turned away and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. Lily, in her natural way, kept things light and joyful. She invited Sophie into every game, offered her the best doll during playtime, and once even gave her the last cookie without being asked. The two girls began sitting closer during movies, sharing a blanket, their heads occasionally resting against one another. Marcus watched this with quiet awe, knowing he could never manufacture this kind of bond. It had to grow, and it was growing faster than he had hoped. It wasn't perfect. Sophie still had nightmares. She still froze when the doorbell rang too suddenly or if someone's voice rose too loudly, even if it was just the television. But she no longer ran from the room. Instead, she would look to Marcus or Lily, eyes wide but steady, like she was asking, "Is this okay?" And when she saw their calm response, she would stay. One evening, Marcus took the girls to a park near the edge of the city. It was an unseasonably warm evening, and he thought the fresh air might help ease some of the tension that still lingered like fog. The playground was nearly empty. Lily raced toward the swings, laughing as the wind pulled at her dress. Sophie hesitated, staying close to Marcus, her hand clutching his coat. "Do you want to try?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. She looked at the swing, then at Lily, who called out, "Come on, Sophie. I'll push you." After a long pause, Sophie nodded. Marcus lifted her carefully into the swing, his hand steadying her until Lily took over, pushing her gently with the kind of care that only children who understand vulnerability know how to give. Sophie didn't speak, but the wind caught her hair as she swung forward, and she closed her eyes. For a few moments, she looked free. Marcus sat on the bench nearby, unable to look away. It hit him then, how something so ordinary could feel like a miracle. This was a child who had slept on cardboard just days ago, and now she was laughing softly under the setting sun. Later that night, after baths and stories and one particularly competitive game of matching animal cards, Marcus was tucking the girls in when Sophie spoke again. "Are you really going to keep me?" Her voice was fragile, like she was testing the air for truth. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, took her small hand in his, and said, "Yes. As long as you'll let me. I'm not going anywhere." She didn't answer right away, but she reached for his other hand, pulling it over the blanket and holding it close to her chest. Lily rolled over in her bed across the room and whispered sleepily, "Told you he would." They all smiled in the dark, each in their own way. That night, Marcus didn't go to his office. He stayed in the hallway outside the girls' room for a long time, sitting on the floor with his back to the wall, listening to their breathing. For the first time in years, he didn't think about work or money or expectations. All he could think about was how fragile life was, and how lucky he was to have found this child, not by design or duty, but by love. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew he hadn't just rescued Sophie. She was rescuing him too. The calm that had settled over the Blake home began to shift subtly with the arrival of a letter bearing the official seal of Child Protective Services. Marcus had been expecting it, but that didn't make the sight of it on his kitchen table any easier. It contained a summons for a court hearing, a formal review of Sophie's case and Marcus's petition for permanent guardianship. The weight of those pages was heavier than anything he had held in years. It wasn't fear of rejection that unsettled him most, it was the thought of someone deciding Sophie's future without understanding who she had become inside this house. They would see dates, signatures, and sterile reports. Would they see the picture she drew of the three of them under the tree? Would they understand how she had whispered, "Daddy," one night and fallen asleep with her head on his chest? He didn't tell the girls about the letter immediately. He wanted to protect the fragile peace that had taken root in their home. He took them on walks, to art classes, to small cafes where they sat by the window and made up stories about the people walking by. Sophie had begun to speak more confidently in public, always glancing at Marcus first before answering a stranger's question. Her trust in him was growing, and he knew that if he lost her now, it would shatter her again, and this time, maybe permanently. Meanwhile, his legal team began preparing for the hearing with precision and urgency. They gathered testimonials from therapists, from Lily's school, even from the pediatrician who had noted Sophie's progress since she arrived. Dr. Reynolds provided a detailed psychological assessment that confirmed Sophie's trauma, but also noted significant emotional improvement since being placed with Marcus. It was all clinical, neatly worded, full of professional terminology that somehow felt too cold to describe what had happened in their home. Marcus hated every page, but he read them all, desperate to ensure nothing was missed. A week before the court date, Marcus received unexpected news that sent a chill through him. Someone had come forward claiming to be related to Sophie. A woman. She had no legal documentation, but she insisted she was a cousin of Sophie's mother and had the right to take her in. Marcus was stunned. The woman, named Dana, lived 3 states away and had no history of contacting any services regarding Sophie's disappearance. When he reviewed her file, it became clear she had a history of housing instability and multiple job losses. Marcus felt something more than concern, it was dread. His lawyers assured him they would challenge the claim, but the fact that someone like Dana could even enter the process made Marcus sick to his stomach. He spent that night pacing the floor, listening to the soft breathing of the girls asleep upstairs, terrified that it could all be taken away in a single morning. When he finally sat Sophie down to explain that they would be going to court soon, he kept his tone light but honest. He told her that it was just a meeting to make sure everything was safe and official, that he wanted her to stay with them forever, but that a judge had to say yes too. She didn't cry. Instead, she looked up at him with serious eyes and asked, "Will they make me leave?" He paused, then shook his head. "I won't let them." She simply nodded, leaned her head against his arm, and whispered, "Okay." The night before the hearing, Lily helped Sophie pick out a dress, a soft pink one with small white flowers. Lily wore matching bows in both their hair and insisted they were going to be like magic sisters in court. Marcus watched them from the doorway and felt an ache so deep it almost doubled him over. He had not expected to love her this much, this fast, and it scared him how essential she had become to their family. In the courtroom the next morning, everything felt too bright, too quiet. Sophie sat beside Lily, her small hands clenched in her lap. Marcus sat straight, his lawyer beside him, his heart pounding in his chest. Dana sat across from them, clearly uncomfortable, her story faltering under questioning. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with gray hair and a calm voice, listened carefully to each witness. When Dr. Reynolds spoke about Sophie's emotional state before and after living with Marcus, her words were measured but unmistakably powerful. "This child has been through trauma that should have broken her spirit. But she is healing, because she is in a safe, stable, loving environment. I do not say this lightly, removing her now would cause irreparable harm." When Marcus was called to speak, he stood and looked directly at the judge. He didn't read the prepared statement his lawyers had given him. Instead, he spoke from the chest, from the place where love and fear collide. "I didn't expect her," he said. "I didn't plan this. But I can't imagine life without her. I've watched her learn to smile again. I've held her when she was shaking with nightmares. I've seen my daughter love her like a sister from the moment they met. This isn't about biology. This is about showing up every day, with everything you have. And I will never stop showing up for her." The courtroom was silent. Sophie's eyes were wide, locked on him. For a moment, he saw something in them, recognition, relief, something almost like joy. The judge called for a short recess. When she returned, she issued her ruling without hesitation. Marcus Blake was granted permanent legal guardianship of Sophie. The air in the room changed. Lily clapped softly before covering her mouth, embarrassed, but no one scolded her. Marcus exhaled in a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he turned to Sophie, who looked at him and said, not in a whisper, but in a steady voice, "Can I call you Dad now?" He nodded, unable to speak, and pulled her into his arms. The court clerk stamped the final document. It was done. But for Marcus, it wasn't just a legal victory. It was a promise fulfilled. A little girl had found a home. And he had found something he hadn't known was missing, another piece of his heart, finally in the right place. In the weeks following the court ruling, something inside the house shifted, not in volume or routine, but in the way time passed. It felt lighter, as if the silent weight that had hung in every corner was now lifted. Sophie began to wake up with a different look in her eyes, one that no longer braced for disappointment or fear. She started using her voice more, asking questions, telling short stories, laughing more freely. One morning she even sang to herself while brushing her teeth, a soft melody with no words, but Marcus stood outside the door and listened like it was the most beautiful song he'd ever heard. Lily's joy was almost impossible to contain. She made a chart and taped it to the fridge, declaring it the official sister board, where she would write down every fun thing they did together. She filled it with glitter pens, stickers, and drawings of their faces. Sophie giggled as she helped decorate it, slowly understanding that permanence didn't have to be loud to be real. Marcus made an effort to slow his work schedule. He cleared his evenings, refused weekend calls, and began taking the girls on walks, not to fancy places, but to quiet ones, the lakeside, the old bookstore, the bakery where the owner now always had 2 small cookies ready when he saw them coming. One evening, while the girls were playing dress-up in the living room, Marcus sat watching them with a kind of wonder that couldn't be explained. Sophie wore one of Lily's old princess gowns, a size too big, but she didn't seem to care. She twirled slowly, arms out, her braids coming loose, and said, "Do you think real princesses eat macaroni and cheese?" Lily responded with authority, "Only the smart ones." Marcus laughed and promised they could have some for dinner. It was moments like these, unscripted, unremarkable on the surface, that felt like miracles stitched into the fabric of their days. Sophie had her first school interview later that month. She clung to Marcus's hand as they walked into the building, but she let go when she saw Lily waving from across the hallway. The principal asked questions, some playful, some serious, and Sophie answered carefully but with increasing confidence. When asked about her family, she paused for a moment before smiling and saying, "I live with my dad and my sister. And we have pancakes on Sundays." That simple sentence felt like a triumph, a small but powerful declaration of a life that was finally hers. There were still hard days. Sometimes Sophie woke up crying and didn't know why. Some nights she didn't want to be touched or talked to. On those nights, Marcus would sit quietly on the floor beside her bed, reading aloud from whatever book Lily had chosen earlier. He didn't always know what to say, but he stayed. And over time, staying became enough. Lily was the first to bring up the idea of celebrating Sophie's Forever Day. She said it with excitement, as if she were planning a party for a superhero. "It's the day she became ours," she explained, already drawing invitations on construction paper. Marcus hadn't thought about it that way, but the idea stuck. They didn't make it fancy. There were balloons, cupcakes, and a cake Sophie picked herself, chocolate with blue frosting. She wore a sparkly dress Lily had chosen and blew out a candle shaped like a number 1, to mark her first official day as a Blake. They took a family photo in the backyard, and when Marcus looked at it later that night, he saw 3 smiles that were real, whole, and completely unforced. That night, as he tucked Sophie into bed, she looked at him and said, "You didn't give up." He paused, unsure if she meant the court, the early hard days, or something else entirely. But she continued, even when I was quiet. Even when I was scared. You didn't leave. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Never, he said. Not for 1 second. Outside, the stars were beginning to peek through the sky. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the hallway clock. And for the first time in his life, Marcus didn't feel like a man chasing success or repairing old regrets. He felt whole. Not because everything was perfect, but because in all the brokenness, something beautiful had grown. Something worth everything. The anniversary of the day Sophie had first come into their lives arrived with the kind of quiet nostalgia that often sneaks in on ordinary mornings. There was no big party, no loud announcement, just the three of them gathered around the breakfast table as sunlight streamed through the windows. Lily had woken up early to make pancakes, overcooked and slightly lopsided, and Sophie had insisted on decorating the table with the same glittery "Forever Family" banner they had made months earlier. Marcus sat watching them, his heart full, his coffee untouched. He remembered every detail of that day a year ago: Sophie's tiny voice, Lily's innocent insistence, the girl on the cardboard in the alleyway. He couldn't reconcile the fragile child from back then with the bright-eyed girl sitting before him now, hair in braids, giggling at a joke Lily had made about unicorns owning phones. They had grown into a rhythm over the months, the kind that doesn't happen overnight but seeps into daily life through repetition, trust, and patience. Sophie had started school and was thriving, her teachers noting how quickly she caught up, how kind she was to others, how fiercely she protected the quieter kids on the playground. At home, she had begun to decorate her room with drawings taped to every wall, sketches of her and Lily climbing trees, their backyard filled with stars, Marcus holding both their hands beneath a rainbow that stretched across the entire page. There were no more locks on the closet door. She slept through the night more often than not. She had learned to swim, to write her full name, and to shout Marcus's name from the upstairs landing when she needed help with math or lost a sock. What surprised Marcus most over that year wasn't just how much Sophie had changed, but how much he had too. He had been a man defined by solitude and structure, someone who measured time in meetings and results. Now, his calendar was filled with school events, therapy appointments, dance recitals, and pancake mornings. He had learned to braid hair, to read bedtime stories with voices, to spot the early signs of an emotional spiral before it erupted. He had learned to slow down, to listen more, to forgive himself for the days he didn't get everything right. He had learned that fatherhood wasn't a title, it was a choice made every day, sometimes with confidence, more often with quiet resolve. On the afternoon of their "found day," as Lily called it, the three of them took a walk to the same part of town where it had all started. The alleyway had been cleaned up, the cardboard gone, replaced with new pavement and flower planters. Sophie didn't flinch when they passed it. She held Marcus's hand and looked up at him, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she simply said, "I remember this place," and squeezed his fingers gently. They walked in silence for a while before Marcus spoke. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head. "Not really. I just want to remember that it happened, and that we found each other." Lily, never one to let a serious moment linger, pointed toward a nearby ice cream stand and shouted, "Emergency. We need sprinkles." The spell was broken, and they all laughed as they rushed over. That evening, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Sophie leaned her head against Marcus's arm, and Lily curled beside them, her thumb lazily flipping through a picture book. Marcus looked down at his daughters, because there was no longer a distinction between blood and bond, only the truth of what they had become. "You know," he said softly, "you both saved me, too." Sophie looked up. "From what?" He smiled. "From thinking I had everything when I really had nothing." Later that night, after the girls were tucked into bed, Marcus sat alone in the living room, flipping through an old photo album Lily had insisted they make. On the final page was a drawing Sophie had made just a week ago. It showed the three of them sitting on a bench, the word home written in large block letters above their heads. Marcus closed the book and looked around the house, the toys scattered on the rug, the art supplies on the dining table, the glow-in-the-dark stars Lily had stuck to the ceiling. It was messy. It was loud. It was real. He thought about the man he had been before all of this, efficient, powerful, alone by choice, and realized that nothing he had achieved before could compare to what he had built in the last year. Not because it was perfect, but because it was built with love, with purpose, and with the quiet courage of showing up day after day. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater and the distant sound of Sophie shifting in her sleep. Marcus leaned back, closed his eyes, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace, the kind that stays, the kind that doesn't ask questions. He didn't need anything else. He had everything he never knew he wanted, and it was more than enough. The ending of this story is quietly powerful in a way that lingers. It doesn't rely on a dramatic twist or some grand reveal, but instead, it honors the truth that real love is built in the everyday, the bedtime routines, the whispered fears, the laughter over pancakes, the choice to stay when it's hard. Marcus's journey from detached CEO to devoted father is not just heartwarming, it's transformative, and it feels deeply earned. What makes the finale stand out is its emotional realism. Sophie's healing isn't instant, nor is Marcus's growth. Both stumble, both carry scars, and yet, through consistent love and presence, they become a true family. It's a reminder that rescue goes both ways. He saved her, yes, but she also gave his life meaning and softness he didn't know he needed. In a world that often celebrates speed, perfection, and control, this story celebrates patience, imperfection, and vulnerability. And that's why the ending works so beautifully. It doesn't shout, it doesn't dazzle, it simply feels right. Like home.